Welcome to Subramani. I'm going to talk about a book called Checklist Manifesto. And let me start from here that financial planning is definitely now a very complicated science. There is some attempt by the government to regulate it through SEBI. Not sure how successful that is going to be, but there is an attempt to say what will be the scope of work, how much is the fees you can charge, why you can do with fees, without fees. The RIA regulation is pretty numbing and mind-boggling. Now into such a complex world, you include human psychology, which is the way how human being behaves, and you combine the two, it's likely to be very explosive. Now if you are a financial planner and you are constantly acquiring knowledge and you are constantly acquiring clients, let's say you have 400 clients and you have a lot of knowledge to be implemented, you have tactical asset allocation, you want to know whether people should put money in cryptocurrency, etc. So there is a huge knowledge base and there is a huge client base. Now to know to which client what will belong is very easy, but to be able to implement it perfectly in toto even by yourself is not going to be very easy, especially if you are delegating it down the line. This brings us to this book called Checklist Manifesto, which was recommended to me by India's famous fund manager Naren Shankaran a few years ago, I think maybe about 6-7 years ago, and I bought it and read it. In fact, I bought it at an airport, so I remember I think it was Jaipur airport or Ahmedabad airport where I bought it, and I read it on the flight, and I decided that a lot of it should be implemented by financial planners. And I'm quite surprised that I wouldn't be very surprised if our great regulator says now this should be standard practice, and here every RIA should have 22 checklists. That's also possible that we implement something like that. That would be very foolish, because only the more committed financial planners and RIAs would be, or even MFDs would be able to apply the rigor and discipline that is required for implementing these checklists. Obviously, the checklists come from Atul Gawande's book, which is Checklist Manifesto, where he says complex businesses like building a bridge or constructing a huge building, all of them had checklists, and therefore you could build a flyover this side and this side and make sure that they met here, and this didn't happen. For this to happen, there has to be a checklist making sure that everything is working in tandem. Now, Atul Gawande, of course, started off with the medical reasons to have a checklist in hospitals. He implemented it, and it has saved billions of dollars, and I think at least tens of thousands of lives, because some doctor missing one step would not look very bad on that day, but later on it has a huge impact, right? It completely changes the way, whether you washed your hand, did not wash your hand, whether you change your gown, did not change your gown, everything can be made into a checklist. And the head nurse, in fact Atul Gawande says the head nurse should be the person who is implementing it, simply because there are too many specialists. So if a brain specialist does not know of a knee problem, and because of that some allergy, he or she might end up giving the wrong medicine. So it is for the chief nurse. Today there is so much specialization in among doctors and even among nurses. I didn't know this till I read Atul Gawande's book, that even among nurses there is a lot of specialization. So there could be an ICU specialist, could be a non-ICU specialist, could be art specialist, could be any of those things. So there is specialization not only among doctors but also among nurses. So there's a good chance that some step is missed or some mistake has happened, and you could end up either with the patient's death or being sued for some very obviously wrong mistake which happened, I mean, on the face of it. So videos are recorded and the checklists are implemented. Now, why should such a checklist not become statutory part of the financial planning thing? Why can't we insist that for every client transaction, every client interaction, there has to be a checklist right from saying, do you know what this conversation is leading to? Do you know what you are going to do, right? So having these kind of checklists is going to be very useful for sure, but I'm not very sure whether it will get implemented saying, oh, it is compulsory to have the checklist, and I don't see any reason why you should not be forced to have checklists, because this is perhaps far more useful, because you know whether there has been application of mind, whether the right questions have been asked, whether the sign off is perfect, right? So will it happen? I really don't know. Should it happen? And I think the answer is yes, it should happen. When will it happen? We do not know. But the problem is there are two things which are worrying. One is the ignorance and one is the ineptitude, and one is the intelligent mind saying, I know what I have to do, right? The problem is in jumping the queue, in say, oh, not washing hands, or not changing the gown, not changing the gloves, and some infection spreading through that can kill a person. It may sound very simple that, oh, why should I keep changing my gown, why should I keep changing my gloves? Well, that's where you carried the illness and gave it to the next patient who died because of that, right? So what could have you done? You could have been more careful. The head nurse could have said, doc, I did not see you change your coat, do you mind changing it again? Doctor, could you please change your gloves, right? Is it possible for a head nurse to do it today? Maybe no, but they thought that they could be empowered to do it. So similarly, in every office there could be a planner and a paraplanner, where the planner does all the work and it is the paraplanner's job to have spoken to the client, collected the details, and so there could be a checklist saying, are you sure about this? Are you sure that your parents are not dependent on you? Yes, now you are 48, but they could be dependent on you when they are 72, when you are 72, right? And they could be alive, right? So making sure that you understand exactly what the client wants, and the client being able to articulate exactly what he wants is more likely to happen with a proper checklist which is filled in by the client. There are IFAs who are using 40-50 page kind of checklists asking for all these kind of details. Why do you think company provided health insurance is sufficient? Just saying it is sufficient is not enough. Or the client saying, oh, I don't want to take a risk, keep all my money in bank fixed deposit. The question to ask is then, do you understand what inflation can do to your portfolio and why you should be in equity, right? Being able to ask all these questions, and far more importantly, by having a checklist manifesto, documenting it and recording it. Perhaps with a video or audio or physically asking the client to fill up the forms himself or herself. Keep all kind of checklists. Make sure that you sit and actually file it, or you actually fill it and then file it, or even best like the insurance application form, make sure that the client fills up all those details so that tomorrow he can't say, oh, I didn't even understand what it was. If he's an educated person and he's filling up a form, the forms are the checklist that you make could be self-explanatory. Client could fill it up and then you could run it through a paraplanner and then make it a part of the client's file, in the sense the client what documents you keep for the client, right? So making sure that all these things happen can be a nice checklist. And I seriously agree with Kitses when he says, I don't see why checklists should not become part of our advisory. I think it's a matter of time that SEBI will require you to make sure that everything is done through a checklist, so that tomorrow an audit trail can be put to it in case something goes wrong. Yeah, thank you.